welcome to the Cafe of Dreams. My name is Frank Thomas, and I have Lynn Kitchen with me today. Good afternoon, Lynn.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you.
Welcome to the Cafe of Dreams, Frank.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. It is always a pleasure to come visit you at the Cafe of Dreams. Today, I know you want to talk to us about the 4-step process that you use to build anything, any dream, any idea, or anything within your life. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Lynn, so you can start telling us all about this.
Great. Well, the Cafe of Dreams is all about building your dreams. Building anything requires a process, and it requires a way of thinking. So what I love to do most in the Cafe of Dreams is really make it simple, break it down. And so today I'd love to share my 4-step process of building anything in your life at all. Mm-hmm. And those 4-step processes are blueprinting, bridging, building, and becoming. So I call it the 4 B's of doing anything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love the fact that we were talking about different things in life that have occurred and have been built around this 4-step process. And one of them that we had discovered was the Brooklyn Bridge just outside of New York City.
That's right. I love the analogy of the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge was the first of its kind of a bridge. I think it was the very first steel suspension bridge ever constructed. And you can imagine it spanned over 1,585 feet to connect New York and Brooklyn over the East Bridge. And at the time, there was nothing like it ever before. Mm-hmm. So I want you to imagine a time in your life, if you are wanting to build something for yourself, whether it's a dream, perhaps it's a business, perhaps it's an amount of money that you wish to earn. Perhaps it is actually something as concrete as a real bridge. Anything that is doable, mm-hmm. is buildable, requires a little bit of visioning first. So imagine what it took to vision the Brooklyn Bridge already built. I mean, now we go across it all the time and we don't think anything of it. But at a particular time in history, it did not exist. As a matter of fact, it only existed in the mind of one man, mm-hmm. its designer, and I believe that was John Roebling, mm-hmm. who was an immigrant from Germany, and he designed the Brooklyn Bridge in his mind. Had never been done before.
Right, and as a matter of fact, I do know, and I've reviewed the history as well of the Brooklyn Bridge. When he proposed the idea, I know the fathers of the city at that time thought it was a great idea, but they dismissed it out of hand because it's impossible. It can't be done.
Right. Most things that we really want to do, we think are impossible, mm-hmm. because either we've never done them before, or perhaps it's never been done before. And in this case, the first suspension bridge was, never had been done before, and it was really an engineering feat. And today it stands as a National Historic Landmark for that reason. Mm-hmm. But just be thinking about in your own life what it is that you would like to design, something that you would like to build. What will that take? Will that take a specific blueprint in your mind? Yes, it will, right? Mm-hmm. Taken the beginning of a vision and the belief that something extraordinary is possible. Mm-hmm. So really, we begin with step number 1, which is the vision. Yeah. And in the vision, obviously, any architect or any engineer has to have a precise vision with such specificity that all of the nuances, for example, in the Brooklyn Bridge, imagine the nuances of all of the weight transference and the different engineering feat that had to be resolved and solved, even in the blueprint prior to building it.
Mhm.
Everything had to be almost resolved in one's mind before it could even be begun.
Exactly. The interesting thing about it too is there was a lot of technologies that they needed just to build the bridge that yet had to be invented either. And that's what made this story so interesting. I know the when they put the footings within the East River, they had to sink them extremely deep to get below the mud bed that was in the river, and they were the first to start to invent or to discover deep sea diving. It wasn't that they were diving thousands of feet, but it was deep enough that when workmen wore air tanks and went down into the river and they were digging it out, the pressure was high enough that they discovered things like the bends, and that had to become part of the blueprinting process as well. How do we handle this nuance? And it's such a great story because the bridge was the big dream, but then they had to figure out these little dreams, these little ideas in between to solve the big problem.
Well, no one foresaw the problems
Oh no.
that were in store for building something as magnificent and complex as that. And I'd like to say that in our own lives, when we're building something that perhaps has never been done before, ever, 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 even maybe the technology has not been built even for your dream, or maybe it has been built and somebody else has done what you want to do, but it's never been done by you.
Mm-hmm.
See, therefore, it's very, very important to have a specific blueprint in mind when you begin that is so specific that you can truly see it already done. You can taste it, you can feel it, and it's not just the seeing part, it's the feeling part. I remember the story about when President Kennedy asked the number one aeronautic engineer, how can we put a man on the moon? And this was back in 1960, 65, I believe. And it was Werner von Braun, who was the chief scientist in that time. And President Kennedy asked him, what would it take for us to put a man safely on the moon and return him back to Earth again? And the answer by that aeronautical engineer was the will to do it,
Mm-hmm.
the specificity of the blueprint. So, you know, when we talk about the first B as blueprinting, and in something as grand as a big construction site, one needs a blueprint. So what is a blueprint? Really, a blueprint is nothing more than a visual equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
So in our dream, our charge, number one, is to come up with a blueprint, a visual equivalent of what it's going to look like, be like, and feel like. So the engineers, the designer, Mr. Roebling, must have seen the bridge already built in his mind. He saw the vision of it already built with cars going across, with people moving across and over the spans of the East River, which was 1,585 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So one had to see that first. And not only see it, but you have to feel what it's going to feel like when it's already completed. So first step is blueprinting. And then, as you mentioned, Frank, as you move into the project, step by step, you begin to uncover the unknowns, the things that they didn't know about, like you can imagine the two great big towers
Mm-hmm.
that hold up the spans of the Brooklyn Bridge. Those two towers, no one really knew how difficult it was going to be, right? And as you mentioned, the engineers, you know, lowered the caissons down of the towers down into to the sea and the bedrock, but they had to actually take the air out of the inside of the caissons in order for it to sink that far, and that's why those divers started to have to dive deeply inside the caissons to get rid of the materials so that those towers would sink far enough down into the bedrock so that they could be so they could be attached. But they did not know at that time that people would, being underwater that long, would, as you say, suffer from the bends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it was actually during that time that they figured out a whole new technology
Right.
of staying down underwater long enough, and figuring out the hyperbaric chamber that to help people, and that's entire underwater technology for deep sea diving.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't known at the time. So what happens is that step 2 I like to talk about is the concept called bridging, because you're bridging the gap of the unknown. Here we are in dreamland, wanting something to happen, right? Wanting to build something. And our destination in mind is over here at the opposite side, perhaps even of the bridge. And you're wanting a completion of something. You're wanting to bridge the gap. So that's why I say step 2 is called bridging. And what is bridging? Nothing more than navigating the gap which is there.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time in our own dreaming, in our own thinking, there's a huge gap between where we are now and where we want to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So bridging is step 2, navigating that gap, and navigating it in such a way that every time we come into the unknowns, the obstacles that get thrown in front of us, because up to that point, we did not know that obstacle existed.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to overcome that obstacle, we actually need to figure out a brand new methodology. So you can imagine what the engineers of that bridge had to do. They had to come up with an entire new technology, a new way of dealing with the divers, right? What
Mm-hmm.
else?
Mm-hmm.
What else could possibly have befallen them? I understand all kinds of problems.
Oh, even
And
John, the original concept person who had made the original concept, as they were planning the bridge out, he died of a freak accident, and his son took over.
yeah,
And it was fortunate that he had trained his son and it was still the day where the father would train the son, so the son would take on the professional trade of the father. So he was able to take that on and continue that dream, so to speak.
absolutely. And so that was a continuation. Imagine one dream continuing like that over generations,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that the end result was important enough that they would find a way. Well, think about this in your own life. Is the end result important enough to you that you will overcome all obstacles to find a way up, in, through, around, underneath, whatever it takes, and not turn back? Because once you have begun, imagine the investment
Mm-hmm.
that it took in time, in energy, in resources, in money, in grants, in human lives. In this case, I understand that several lives were lost in the building of this bridge.
That was very true, very true. And the interesting thing here is that the bridging process is critically important, because I find that when I'm working on a project or I'm trying to bring something into conception and completion, I'll go from the blueprinting. So the blueprinting in my mind, I'm starting to see how things will look. Might not have all the details, but I can see a vision of the final product. And so I start doing the bridging process. And in the bridging process, I might stop and discover I've got to go back to blueprinting and modify the blueprint to get me to where I want to be, so that I'd be jumping back and forth between the blueprinting and the bridging and the blueprinting and the bridging. I dare say I find myself, I jump through all 4 of the steps back and forth to refine and define that vision that I had. A lot of times I find that folks will have a vision, will have a dream, and they get stuck on the blueprinting because, and we've talked about this before, it becomes a forest, it becomes so huge, and it's important to start the bridging process, because we don't need to figure out all the the fine details. I'm sure that there was lots of fine details when the Brooklyn Bridge was being built. They were not even conceived of in the blueprinting and bridging initially, but they still pursued it, and they would bridge the ideas, and they would say, okay, to do this, we have to do this, and to do this, they have to do this. And they would go back to the blueprinting stage and make modifications to the blueprint.
Make modifications. And that would be true even if you were building your own dream house. You see, you sit with an architect and you have a plan that you really love, and then as you begin to build, things shift. Maybe the ground upon which you built your house begins to shift. All kinds of things happen. And you're right, you have to go back to the blueprinting phase and make adjustments. But here's the key. Most people stop.
Mm-hmm.
Most people come back, and the gravitational pull to the norm, which is back to point A, is so strong that we don't even recognize. That's why moving forward with the help of a mentor, with the help of an architect, if you're building a house, with the help of a coach, with the help of anybody to help you through that bridging phase, so that you're truly moving forward into the building phase. The bridging phase is a very, very sensitive time, because you're right, you can come back to the beginning, come back to rework your blueprint, and you can get stuck there. Mm-hmm. Many dreams have been stuck on the blueprint board and never really made it off. So bridging is a very, very important time. It's an important step, and it's probably one of the most fear-laden steps as well, because you're moving right off of the first platform into the unknown. And maybe you get to the first platform and the second platform, and then you suddenly are facing a chasm. Mm-hmm. I remember the movie of what was the name of the movie? The Indiana Jones. That's right. Mm-hmm. Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, where he was searching for the Holy Grail, and he could not get further because there was this huge chasm mm-hmm. in front of him. And so he wanted to back off because of fear. And then suddenly there was a message in his soul that was even more profound, that said, no, go anyway. So he jumped over the chasm, and of course in the movie, something else appeared to it. Actually, something new unfolds for us. So that brings me to the third B in building your dream, and that is inside the building of it. When you are moving into that area where you are building, there will be times that you can be fearful. There will be times that you could become catatonic. There will be times that you just want to stop and do no more. Imagine on the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, once Mr. Roebling passed away, that could have been the end of it right there. But someone believed in it mm-hmm. enough and said, no, this is a go. Let's move it forward. And in our own dreams, we have to be that person. And hopefully we won't be passing away in the middle of our dreams. But we have to be the person to say, no, there's something deeper inside me that says, you must go for it. And when we do in the building stage, that's when there is almost like a providence that opens up. Some new piece of information opens up. Some new piece of discovery opens up, and you say, oh, this is the way through. In other words, like you said, we don't need to know it all in order to begin. As we proceed, we learn. And that's the beauty of proceeding and making sometimes a leap into the unknown, across chasms and over difficulties. And imagine the difficulties of the Brooklyn Bridge and all of the different caissons and the wiring and people dying and so forth. But there was a reward that it would be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So we always have to bring that to mind, right?
Very true, and it's interesting that you mentioned that that it's easy to stop. It's easy to end that process anywhere in. You could be 1% in or 99% done, and you could just stop. And I believe that a dream and needs to literally have mentorship to make it bigger than ourselves, regardless of what it is. It could be that you're trying to, plan a vacation that's impossible in your mind's eye right now, or maybe you're building your Brooklyn Bridge. You need to bring other people in on that dream to help you in the refinement process and to make it bigger than yourself.
Well, certainly it helps. There's not a person who has attempted a great achievement that hasn't gotten help. Even Babe Ruth, who went to the bat more times than anybody else and struck out more times than anybody else. He had coaches. He had people behind him saying, you can do this. And of course, the more times at bat, the more you're going to be able to accomplish your dreams. So the effort that you're willing to put forth and the willingness to fail along the way, I think is very, very important, because when we fail, who is there to help us see that, it's not necessarily failure, it's just more information.
Mm-hmm.
For example, all of the Thomas Edison, who was the most prolific inventor,
Mm-hmm.
How many times did he fail? And he said, no, I don't look upon failure as failure or a stopping point. I look upon it as more information. Okay, this is not it. So he would go back into his imagination and ask his blueprinting, his imagination, his higher image of the completed idea. He would ask the completed idea, what more information do you have for me? And then something magnificent would come to him through his intuition. So it's more information is obviously always needed. How do we get that? Sometimes it doesn't come just with ourselves. It comes with the force and attraction of a partner in believing, a mentor, a coach. And that's why I think it's extremely exciting to be a part of this process to help people build their dreams. We move it from the blueprinting stage, we move it into the bridging stage, we move it into the actual building stage. What have you accomplished today? Yay. Mm-hmm. And then you celebrate your wins and you move forward. And you have maybe bump up against a certain wall or an area of unknown. And you must have sometimes a leap of faith to move into
so true.
Believing that this dream is important enough. And oftentimes I have found one needs to go back to the beginning, to the decision that they made that this dream mattered and why. Sometimes when everything else fails, you come back to the why. Why am I doing this? Well, in the Brooklyn Bridge, the big why was there was an entire society that wanted to traverse this very, very difficult body of water. Mm-hmm. And as you had mentioned to me, in 1866, the idea began because of the amount of ice that they had to traverse, the ferry boats going from one side of the river to another. And it actually took 20 years to build the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah, that's a long time.
We get discouraged if it takes more than an afternoon at times.
That's right. That's right. So the building phase is one in which we need to turn failures into stepping stones. Mm-hmm. I like to say, and that's something that often takes, as you said, help. It takes a mentor. It takes a coach. It takes somebody believing in your dream. We don't have to do anything alone.
When I was building the software that I was building, having that other person there, having that partner there that was saying to me, so how is it going? How far have you gotten? It literally continually put my feet to the fire. and I would have to show these results. Sometimes I fell out of the schedule, but I found that when I eventually made the commitment in my mind that I was going to complete these steps in a certain period of time, to be honest with you, I thought that I could, snap this piece of software out in 2 weeks. 3 months later, I got a beta out. And it was a difficult process, and I found myself doing, I call it the two-step, or I would be working.
Step forward, one step back.
Yeah, 2 steps forward, one step.
Forward, one step back.
Right.
And then 2 steps forward, and then a baby step back. And then suddenly you have, no, I absolutely agree with you. It's a journey, it's a process. And we always have this idea at the beginning that, it's going to take much less time, effort, and then it ends up. Why is that? Why do we always think that, this is not going to be such a big deal, and then halfway through we get impatient with ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the answer to that is because we don't foresee how much we need to grow in order to make the shift.
Yes.
We can often see our dream out 3-dimensionally, out in the future, and we can see ourselves navigating the gap and building the bridge and getting to the other side, and we can see that in our minds, but we often cannot anticipate the shift that's going on within us at that time and what that takes. So that brings me to the 4th step of the actual transformation of building anything, building your dream. And the 4th step is in the becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Is in the becoming. It's not that we achieve what it is that we want to achieve, although that's great. We have the Brooklyn Bridge. It's not just that. It's what we become in the process. It's who we become in the process. It's how we grow in the process. It's that feeling that I did that. I am the person with the capacity to have done that today, and I wasn't that person 6 months ago or a year ago,
mm-hmm.
or even in case of the Brooklyn Bridge. I always loved the celebration that this country had when the Brooklyn Bridge finally opened.
Mm-hmm.
That was the day of becoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, there was so much fear that people did not want to go across that bridge because it was, this suspension bridge. Nobody had ever seen anything like it before. There was an awful lot of national fear that if people did go across, they would fall into the East River. And so many of these events were taking place, and you probably know of, Frank, of the procession of elephants,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The circus came to town. The circus came to the rescue. The circus brought their elephants, hundreds of thousands of pounds of elephants, marching across that bridge to show the townspeople that this was a bridge that would be safe, that you indeed could trust your life to traversing that bridge. And on finally the day that it opened and people were believing enough that this was safe, then it was a day of national celebration, and there were 1,800 vehicles that went across finally, and 150,000 people
Mm-hmm.
walked across that bridge in unison. And that was an amazing moment, a day of becoming, a national feat and a holiday, a celebration. If each one of us could look upon our dreams, whether it is that you are building a business, where you're building a house, and building anything, even building an annual income for yourself that's twice as much as last year, whatever it is that you're building, to have achieved that, to become that, to be that, that's really the whole essence of what dreaming is for to begin with, is that we get to become someone new.
Isn't that so true? I do know that even going through my own personal process of I had programmed off and on over the years, and but taking the mantle up and becoming a programmer,
Yes.
I had to shed the it brings to mind another story, so I'm going to put the two of them together. It brings to mind the concept of that we treat it like a hobby, and when we become it, becomes serious. It's no longer a hobby. It's who we become. It's who we are.
It's
And I know those who built the Brooklyn Bridge and who were a part of it, they became different people because of it. So that there's a becoming in terms of they have this new bridge, or you have the new dream that you brought into reality. But it's the internal becoming that I think is less tangible but more important.
It is. It is. And I love it because every day we dream something new.
Mm-hmm.
Every year we dream something new. There's a part of us that is always growing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part of us that life itself wants us to grow, wants us to be a larger expression of it. And so every time we become the dream that we had in our hearts, get ready. There's the next one. And then the next one after that, and the next one after that. And actually, we become master dream builders,
Mm-hmm.
not just on one dream, but we traverse the spans of our existence, the spans of our lives, from our birthday to to the unknown moment when we pass on. We traverse that by becoming
Mm-hmm.
greater and grander expressions of life itself. What is it that life wants you to become today? What would you love? What would you love? Anything you would love, it's got a 4-step process.
Mm-hmm.
Blueprinting, which is the visioning, blueprinting, bridging, building, and then becoming.
Yeah. And I think it's important that for us to understand these 4 concepts to building one's dreams, because an interesting thing happens in that journey. And it was actually really kind of shown to me this week. I kind of realized it with a few situations that occurred just this past week, that a lot of people who have negative habits, they're spending money on the wrong things, they are discontent, they are unhappy, you name it. It all seems to come down to the fact that they've never stopped and said, okay, what are my dreams?
Well,
where am I supposed to be going? And
yeah.
once you accomplish, and the interesting thing is, sometimes you just have to accomplish a small goal.
Mm-hmm.
And once you accomplish that, you kind of feel, oh, hey, it's almost like you've built the foundation to your other dreams. Now you seem to see direction, and you start that process again, the blueprinting, the bridging, the building, and then the becoming, and then the blueprinting, the building. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because there really is no difference between big and small when it comes to who we are being in life. This process can be very, very much effective, even if it is just something in one's day, one small thing you're wanting to accomplish. I have friends of mine who are in wheelchairs who cannot do a lot. So they will use these 4 tools just to do something that's important to them in a small time frame, be able to navigate their day in such a way that at the end of the day they feel like they have become a little bit more joyous, a little bit more happy, a little bit more in love with life in spite of their circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
These tools are very very important to each one of us, whether it's big, medium, small. These tools work whether it's applied to relationships or achievements. And the more I practice these 4 steps and help others do so, the more I'm just amazed that we really are geniuses, in control and in awe of our own power, all of us, human beings. So it really is whatever it is that we want, and the attention and awareness that we have, we can really do, be, have, give anything that we truly want, whatever it is you love.
We have such large amounts of capacity to do incredible things, and applying the wisdom of this 4-step process into it is just genius, in that it helps bring clarity. And it really helps bring that clarity that we need to turn the thought into a thing, or the vision into reality.
Yes, there's a really wonderful quote by James Allen, and maybe we'll close with this quote. James Allen was the author of a wonderful book called As a Man Thinketh. Mm-hmm. And it's all about your thoughts become things. And how does that happen? Well, this is all about that. And he says, sow an act, you will reap a habit. Sow a habit, you reap a character. Sow a character, you reap a destiny.
Excellent.
So thank you very much, Frank. I've enjoyed it. Come back and we'll go deeper into each one of these 4 steps: building, blueprinting, bridging, building, and becoming.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you. Subscribe today for more videos at youtube.com, or for podcasts at iTunes, The Cafe of Dreams.